They offered me a place to heal, but left behind something far more sinister. Cameras in every room, passwords I never set, smiles that never reached their eyes. What began as recovery turned into surveillance. What I uncovered was never meant to be found. And now, escaping isn't just survival, it's redemption. I stepped out of the cab and took a deep breath, the spring air spilling around me like a hesitant promise. Laurel's address was familiar. Suburban streetlights, tidy sidewalks, freshly mowed lawns. My heart tightened in my chest. It had been years since I'd spent real time with my daughter, not counting hurried holidays or phone calls masked by polite conversations. But now I was here, moving slowly on crutches after knee surgery, leaning on the dark cab door to steady myself. Laurel opened the front door before I could ring the bell. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, a soft smile on her face that almost reached her eyes. She said, "Hi, Mom," and hugged me, careful not to jostle my healing knee. It felt warm, familiar, but there was a stiffness in her shoulders I couldn't ignore. Behind her stood Grayson, tall, impeccably dressed, wearing a grin that didn't quite reach his eyes. He stepped forward. "Welcome back to your home," he said, voice smooth but slightly clipped. He took the rolling suitcase from me, too willingly. His hand brushed mine and lingered, just a moment too long, and I looked away. Laurel guided me inside. Her apartment, no, their house, was clean, minimalist. Pale walls, a few framed black and white photographs, designer vases on open shelves. Everything was arranged, immaculate. It looked beautiful, but I felt oddly unsettled. I set down my purse on a console table, and Laurel offered, "Let me get your cane. And your pillow set up too. I made it just like you like at your house." The kindness in her voice tugged at me, but beneath it was a tension I couldn't name. There was something restrained, like air held underwater, gentle but waiting. Grayson stepped forward with the cane. "I'm happy to help," he said, offering me a seat by the front window. He had that way of being helpful that felt like a performance. I nodded, grateful, and took my seat, wincing as my leg adjusted. Laurel asked me about my flight, my recovery. It was small talk, syrupy, precise. Each question felt edited, measured. I smiled and answered, something in the back of my mind reminding me to watch my tone. They said they'd be heading out of town tomorrow, an overnight work conference upstate. "You'll have the house to yourself," Laurel added, tone clipped like an afterthought. Grayson nodded, brandishing his phone as if he'd already booked rides, restaurants, flights. "Think of this as your mini retreat," he said. "Need anything? Just text." Laurel touched my arm on her way out the door. "Love you, Mom." Her voice cracked ever so slightly. I leaned in for another hug, but she pulled away quickly. Grayson said, "Let's get you settled," and closed the door behind them, their footsteps fading. I stood in the foyer, looking down the empty hallway. The door locked behind me with a click. My heart kicked, confusion and relief intertwining. I wheeled my suitcase down the clean hallway, the hush settling around me. I passed family photos pinned to a corkboard. Weddings, vacations, birthday cakes, snapshots of smiles. I paused at one. Laurel laughing with a woman dressed for a bridal shower, champagne in hand. I remembered that sense of pride and happiness when I gave her away to Grayson last year. But something felt off now, like the photo had an undercurrent I'd never seen. At the guest room door, I pressed my ear against the cold wood. Silence. I opened it to a pale, cozy room, queen bed made up in crisp linens, a bedside table with a lamp and a pitcher of water, and warm fleece blankets folded neatly. I placed my suitcase on the floor and ran my fingers through the soft covers. A picture frame with Laurel and me on the beach leaned on the headboard. I smiled, remembering sunlit laughter. It felt comforting until my gaze traveled upward to the ceiling corner, a small blinking red light. I froze. My mind raced. A camera? But why? I reminded myself this was a new city for them. Maybe they had a security system. Maybe the builders installed cameras in all rental units. I rubbed my eyes and rationalized. Maybe I'd seen it wrong. I lifted the pillow and checked behind it. No wires, nothing unusual. I settled onto the bed, leaning against the headboard, cane clattering softly to the floor. I tried to read the blinking light as purposeful, a safety feature. Still, I felt exposed, watched. I clenched the pale sheets under my fingers. With a sigh, I closed my eyes and let the day's exhaustion overtake me.
My body relaxed. Maybe this was paranoia. Maybe I'd gone soft. I heard a thunk as something in.
The house settled, and I blinked awake, heart pounding. I got up slowly and walked out of the room. The hallway looked longer now, more ominous. I flicked the light switch. The overhead fixture buzzed and glowed. Shadows pooled in the corners. I followed the grain of the hardwood floor down the hall. In the living room, I paused. Empty glass coffee tables, plush couch, invisible remote controls. The TV was off. The silence pressed in on me. I glanced at the ceiling. Another corner camera? Yes. Two more blinking red dots. I leaned into the sofa, hands gripping the fabric. Why were there cameras in a home? I tapped my phone. No notifications, no missed messages, nobody watching. I tried to breathe normally, but my chest felt tight. I moved toward the kitchen, an open plan with sleek appliances. I opened the fridge, just some organic almond milk, apples, bottled water, no homemade jam like I'd expected. I shut it softly. I walked back into the hallway and decided to check the foyer by the front door. Something about the entrance felt off now. I knelt to inspect the doormat, the floorboards. Nothing. No wire, no box. Just the locked deadbolt I hadn't set. I closed my eyes and pictured the house as it was before, as I'd seen it in photos. I pictured those cameras as benign. And yet they felt intrusive, like eyes following me, documenting my every move. A pang of resistance shot through me. Maybe I was jumping to conclusions. Maybe they really were for security. Maybe I should relax. Still, something tugged at me, an uneasy whisper. Late afternoon sunlight washed through the blinds, slanting across the floor. I glanced at the clock. I'd been here only an hour. I should rest. I wheeled myself back to the guest room. I ran a hand across the bedspread and slumped onto it. My phone buzzed. A message from Laurel. Hope you're settled. Love you. I stared at the text. Love you. Could love ever feel as cold as this? I forced a reply. Thanks, honey. All good here. XO. My reply felt fragile. I set the phone down and stared at the blinking dot. Time passed slowly. I wondered where my own boundaries were. Could I fall into suspicious thinking at my age, or was this part of me waking up after months in bed? I drifted between reading and napping, awareness sharpening around every creak in the floor, every whisper of wind against the windows. As dusk settled, I rose and moved through the house again, checking the cameras. Yes, they were real, unobtrusive, pointed. I tried to focus on the beauty of the space, the modern art, the way the lamps diffused light, the oak floor gleaming. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I was an exhibit. I noticed the guest room door was unlocked. I closed and locked it. Then watched the red light once more. Finally, I reached up and taped over it with the white painter's tape I found inside a drawer. The light was dimmed beneath the tape, but I felt my pulse slowing. I lay back down and exhaled, a small victory. Still, the tape felt thin. The camera could be uncovered. The system could be hacked. But I decided to wait. Tomorrow, I'd ask directly. I'd do it calmly. I'd test my assumptions. I closed my eyes to pretend sleep. But my mind raced with memories. Laurel as a toddler, pastel dresses, scrunched up face when she learned to climb stairs, me holding her hand, her first bike ride, the pride, the fear, the tenderness. I whispered her name. My pulse steadied. I didn't know what tomorrow held. But tonight, I would stay awake long enough to protect this space. I would remind myself that I was her mother. I deserved clarity, and I owed myself the right to ask questions. I sank into the pillow, eyelids heavy, senses sharpened by that single blinking red light. In the hush, I felt a promise, not one from Grayson, not one from Laurel, but one from me. A promise to watch, to question, and to remember who I was. The silence of the house thickened the longer I stayed. At first, it felt like peace, a rare and welcomed quiet. But as the hours turned into days, I realized it wasn't peace. It was control. An invisible structure laid out in precision, like a carefully choreographed play. And I had been cast without my consent. It started with small things. The drawers in the hallway console were locked. Each container in the pantry had a printed label: breakfast grains, evening teas, no caffeine shelf. Even the fruit was portioned: 4 apples, 3 bananas, placed just so in a glass bowl. The bathroom lights were set to switch on at exactly 7 p.m. The guest room lamp dimmed at 10:30 p.m. no matter what I did. I tested it, Night after night, turned the lamp off at 10:25, turned it on again at 10:29. At 10:30, like clockwork, it would dim. Not flicker, dim, controlled, programmed. The morning after I noticed the first pattern, I entered the living room and caught it, a small mechanical whisper. I turned my head toward the camera in the corner, and the lens followed me, not subtly, deliberately. I stopped breathing. I waved my hand slowly. The lens adjusted. I stepped to the left. It followed. It was no longer a passive eye. It was a sentinel. My phone buzzed. Grayson, just checking in. How's the knee this morning? The message read like a kindness, but after the movement of the camera, it chilled me. Was this his way of showing he was always watching, or was I spiraling into paranoia? I didn't reply right away. I sat on the edge of the couch and stared at the camera. I counted the seconds before I moved again, tried to determine if there was a lag. There wasn't. Grayson texted again. Try the peppermint tea tonight. Laurel says it helps you sleep. That detail shouldn't have felt invasive, but it did, because I hadn't touched the tea yet. I had looked at the tin earlier that afternoon. I never even opened the lid. He knew. I stood up and walked to the hallway mirror, where sunlight streamed in just enough to reflect the edges of the camera's lens. In the reflection, I saw myself. Tired eyes, a slight stoop from pain, a woman still pretending she wasn't afraid. I heard my ex-husband's voice in my head. You make everything about control. It's not control, it's care. He said that the night I found the tracker in my car. He said that again the day I asked him to stop checking my texts. Control disguised as care, surveillance disguised as love. I went to the hallway closet and tried the door. Locked. I crouched, tried the utility drawer in the kitchen. Locked. Another one near the back door. Locked. Only the spaces they wanted me to use were open. In my room that night, I tried once more to disable the guest room camera. I stood on a chair, pain shooting through my leg, and used a butter knife to pry the cover, but it wouldn't budge. I felt the faintest vibration from inside the casing. It was active, powered, and deeply embedded. I stepped down. My hands were shaking. Grayson texted again that night. Let me know if you need anything. I can have groceries delivered if you're out. I hadn't touched the fridge all day. I was suddenly terribly aware of what else he might be tracking. I couldn't sleep. I kept seeing reflections, shards of light off framed photos, the glint of the lens. Every dark corner felt like it held something I couldn't see. I got up and walked down the hallway with my flashlight, careful not to trigger any smart lights. I wanted to know. I needed to know. If I was crazy, I wanted to be sure. The office door creaked as I opened it. Laurel's office, now Grayson's. His laptop was still on the desk, glowing faintly. I didn't touch it at first. I just stared at it. A vault. A confessional. Then I pulled the chair back and sat. The login screen was still open. Laurel's name was not the user listed. It said, Grayson Maine. No password prompt, just a blinking cursor. I clicked. The desktop loaded in seconds. Folders lined the screen. Most were labeled generically: household, finances, work. One was buried deep in a nested folder path labeled System Logs. I clicked through. Inside were files named by dates: today, yesterday, last week. I opened one. Text filled the screen. Subject continues normal patterns. Mealtimes predictable. No significant deviation since Tuesday. Attempted camera disable noted. Room G. User appears suspicious, but passive. Reinforced check-ins to stabilize perception. I scrolled, heart pounding. Pattern resistance observed in Laurel. Emotional withdrawal increasing. Timeline under review. Begin phase 3 by next month. May require reset if anomalies persist. I sat back. It wasn't a system log, it was a journal, his journal, but not about business or wellness. It was about us, about me, about Laurel. I opened another file, dated a week before my arrival. Laurel's mother scheduled to arrive. Observe her baseline behaviors, test influence spectrum, note interaction, limits and inherited response conditioning. Evaluate if familial regression triggers counter-mirroring in Laurel. My mind reeled. Counter-mirroring? Response conditioning? He was writing like a behavioral scientist dissecting lab rats. But we were not rats. We were his family. The light from the monitor cast a sterile glow on the walls. I turned toward the office window and caught my reflection in the darkened glass. I looked pale, small, half erased. A ghost in my own daughter's life. I clicked into one more file, the latest entry. External subject attempted physical interference with room G node. Initiate passive reassurance, text outreach, maintain illusion of care. Subject has not yet vocalized concerns. Conditioning protocol successful thus far. Laurel's divergence remains an outlier. That word again, conditioning. It wasn't just about me, it was about Laurel too. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. I knew that cold. It was the same cold I'd felt in my own marriage when my husband started locking me out of decisions, telling our friends I was forgetful, taking credit for things I managed. It was the cold of invisible manipulation. I stood, pushed the chair back, heart hammering. I copied the files to a USB I found in the desk drawer, hands trembling. I paused, staring at the monitor, at the flickering lines of text. This wasn't just narcissism. This was methodical. Laurel had internalized his grip the same way I had once accepted her father's. She hadn't become him. She had been trained to survive him. And now, I was being studied, watched, prodded like a subject in a private experiment. I shut down the computer. As I passed the hallway mirror, my own reflection startled me again. Not because it looked unfamiliar, but because it looked like a version of me I'd long buried. A woman stripped of voice, relearning how to scream in silence. I whispered to myself, "No more." Back in the guest room, I sat on the bed and clutched the USB in my palm. I noticed Laurel's tablet on the nightstand. Something flickered across the screen, a notification banner. Backup sync failed, Grayson journal export, Laurel's drive. I froze. It wasn't her journal. It was his, and she'd been trying to copy it too. Laurel knew. She'd seen the same files. She'd started something, maybe she'd never finished, maybe she'd been caught, but she had tried. And now, with every breath, I knew this wasn't just about survival anymore. This was about rescue. I sat at the kitchen table long after the sun had set. Grayson's journal open on the screen in front of me. The hum of the refrigerator was the only sound in the room. The cursor blinked on the last entry. Emotional calibration incomplete. Laurel's response rate unpredictable. Need further isolation. I read the phrase over and over. Emotional calibration. It sounded like something out of a machine learning manual, not something you'd write about a person you claim to love. Every word in his journal was clinical, precise, cruel in its detachment. Track deviation, molding is incomplete. Variable removal pending. That line chilled me the most. Variable removal. I had no idea what it meant, whether it referred to me or Laurel or someone else entirely. But it vibrated with threat. I reached into my purse and pulled out my own notebook, the soft cover bent and familiar. Inside were my scribbled thoughts from the past few days, entries written in bed, in the bathroom with the door locked, sometimes scrawled quickly in the margins of receipts or the backs of envelopes. March 4th. Laurel didn't call back. Maybe I pushed too hard, or maybe she's just tired. Why do I always assume it's me? March 6th. I saw the camera move again today. I know I did. But when I looked back, it was still. Is that how gaslighting works? You stop trusting your own eyes? March 7th. Grayson asked about the herbal tea. I never told him I looked at it. My words read like questions, his like commands. His were saturated in superiority, mine in doubt. And when I saw them side by side, I realized how deeply I'd internalized the habit of second-guessing myself. Not just here. My entire life. I traced my fingers along the grain of the table, and it took me back, years back, to a table just like this one in my childhood home. My mother at one end, my father reading the paper at the other. My sister, radiant and sharp-tongued, always praised for her ambition. I was the quiet one, the reliable daughter. Which meant I learned early not to speak out of turn. There were no cameras then, but the monitoring was still there. Questions like, "Do you really need that second helping?" Or, "Why are you always in your room?" Quiet rules about how to sit, how to talk, what to wear. I was never hit, never screamed at. But that wasn't the only way to break someone down. You can do it with coldness, with silence, with preference that cuts deep and never names itself. Laurel grew up in a softer version of that same house. The patterns passed down like heirlooms, polished, unspoken, deeply familiar. I raised her while I was still nursing my own wounds. I praised her for being adaptable, for not crying, for staying composed during the custody fights. She learned the rules without my saying them out loud. And she watched me ignore red flags with her father like they were part of the wallpaper. There was one night, when Laurel was 12, that kept resurfacing like a bruise. Her father had come home late, angry that dinner was cold. He slammed a cabinet shut so hard the door cracked. I flinched. Laurel didn't. She just stood in the hallway, quiet, watching. I didn't say anything. I cleaned up the splinters. I told her he was tired. Years later, I found her college essay. It opened with the line, "My mother taught me that silence is the price of peace." I never told her I cried reading it. I never told her it felt like both a tribute and an accusation. I stared at the kitchen clock now. 10:43 p.m. The night silence deepened. I picked up my phone and called her. It rang 5 times before going to voicemail. I called again. This time she answered. Her voice was tight. "Mom, everything okay?" I swallowed hard. "Laurel, I need to ask you something, and I need you to really hear me." A pause. "I'm listening. I know about the cameras, and I know about the files on Grayson's computer. I've read them." Silence. "I found his journal, the one with all the entries. He's been tracking us, testing us." She didn't speak. "Laurel, sweetheart, this isn't okay. It's not normal. It's not—" Her voice cut in, sharp and tired. "You sound paranoid." The words hit like a slap. "No," I said quietly. "I sound like someone who finally opened her eyes." Another pause. She sighed. "Mom, you've been through a lot. The surgery, the meds. Maybe it's just—" "Don't do that," I said, stronger now. "Don't use my recovery as an excuse to dismiss what I know is true." She didn't respond. "I saw the footage," I added. "Of you, of me, of the house. I saw the entry where he called me a variable. Laurel, what has he called you?" She exhaled sharply, and for a second I thought I heard a tremble. But her words came out controlled. "This is just how he processes stress. It's analytical. He's not trying to hurt anyone." "Sweetheart," I whispered, "that's exactly how your father used to explain it. That's the exact same script." Her voice broke then, barely audible. "You left me with him. You let him treat you that way." I closed my eyes. The sting was fair. It was true. "I know," I said, "and I've lived with that guilt every day. I didn't know how to protect you then, but I know how to see now. I know how to speak now." Another silence. This one was different, not angry, just fragile. I sat back, eyes blurring with tears I didn't wipe away. I wasn't trying to win. I just wanted to be heard. "I'm scared for you," I said, quieter now. "I'm scared because I see him doing to you what your father did to me, and I see you believing that love means being observed, measured, corrected. That's not love. That's submission." I heard her inhale. Then, "I have to go." Before I could respond, the call ended. I sat at the table long after the screen faded to black. I thought of every time I'd been called paranoid, dramatic, ungrateful, every time I'd smoothed over the cracks instead of standing in the light. And now, my daughter was standing in that same shadow, her voice echoing back the same lies I once used to justify staying. I turned toward the kitchen window. In the dark glass, my reflection hovered beside the red eye of the corner camera. I didn't look away. Not this time. Not. The drawer had always been there, quiet and unassuming, part of Grayson's sleek mahogany desk that took up the far wall of his home office. I'd walked past it a dozen times, hesitated a dozen more, but tonight, something in me refused to walk away again. I waited until night cloaked the house in silence, until I could hear nothing but the creak of my own breath and the faint hum of electricity in the walls. Then I knelt, flashlight clenched between my teeth, and examined the drawer's edge. The lock was delicate but old-fashioned, mechanical, not electronic. Grayson had been too confident, too methodical to assume anyone would even try. He underestimated me. With a thin hairpin I'd fished from the lining of my coat and a kitchen skewer I bent with shaking hands, I maneuvered in the keyhole, listening for that subtle click. It came quicker than I expected. The drawer slid open with a whisper. Inside were 6 USB drives, each labeled with a date. Clean handwriting, no smudges, no dust. The latest was from just 2 days ago. The earliest, 5 months back. My heart was a live wire in my chest. I took the most recent one, slipped it into Laurel's old tablet, and watched. The footage was grainy at first, a living room shot. Grayson on the couch, Laurel pacing. No sound, just her mouth moving, hands gesturing. She was agitated, clearly mid-argument. He sat still. Too still. Not responding, not matching her distress. She finally sank to her knees on the carpet and pressed her hands over her face. The camera zoomed. Automatically. My stomach turned. I clicked through more clips. Different dates, different angles. One in their bedroom, one in the kitchen, one in the bathroom. Dear God. Even the bathroom. I watched my daughter crying in the shower, silent sobs, her arms wrapped around herself, the water cascading over her shoulders like a shield. The camera held her in its frame like prey. I had to look away. Another video showed her talking to herself in the mirror, her lips forming phrases I couldn't make out. Over and over she repeated something, fists clenched at her sides. The camera lens never moved, but it felt like it leaned in. I covered my mouth, suddenly aware I was holding my breath. She wasn't complicit. She wasn't hardened. She wasn't numb. She was trapped. Every odd smile, every evasive response, none of it was detachment. It was survival. Her detachment was a shield. A mask she'd been forced to wear for so long she no longer knew where it ended. And she began. And Grayson, he didn't just watch, he studied, he curated. One clip from their bedroom made my hands shake. Laurel lay asleep, arm draped over her stomach. A small framed photo of me was beside her on the nightstand. The lens slowly zoomed in on the photo. The implication was clear. He knew she still needed me. He saw it. And that made me dangerous. I began documenting everything. Photographing each USB, labeling every file directory, recording voice notes to myself so I wouldn't forget a detail. My hands moved on autopilot, but my mind felt fractured, distant, brittle, like I was watching all of this from behind glass. That's when I saw the final file on the most recent USB. It wasn't labeled like the others. It had no timestamp, just a single word. If. I clicked it open. The screen was dark at first. Then Laurel's face appeared, lit by a single lamp, eyes rimmed red, jaw tight. She stared into the camera. Her lips trembled before she spoke. "If you're watching this," she whispered, "you need to leave, now." She looked over her shoulder, then back at the lens. Her voice was rushed but steady. "I don't know who finds this. Mom, if it's you, I'm sorry, I tried to stop it, I really did. But I think he knows I've been recording over his backups. I found the cache once. I tried to reroute them, encrypt them, but he's smarter than I thought." She inhaled sharply. "He's not just watching, he's experimenting. On both of us. You're part of it now. He brought you here for a reason." My breath caught. The room spun. Laurel continued. "If you find this, go to the hallway panel, behind the breaker box. There's a secondary network switch. That's where he keeps the master logs. Don't trust the cloud backups. He wipes those, but the panel's manual. It stores everything." She wiped her eyes. "I'm going to try something. I don't know if it'll work, but I won't be here when you watch this. I hope you're safe. I hope I'm safe. But if not," she paused, voice cracking, "please don't stay. Please don't try to fix it alone. Just go." The video ended. I sat in stunned silence, the image frozen on her last frame. A sob rose in my throat. It cracked through me loud and ugly. I had failed her once already. I had stood by when her father chipped away at her confidence. I told myself she was fine because she wasn't bruised. I told myself she was strong because she smiled through clenched teeth. And now she was begging me, through a secret video, to stop pretending I could fix this alone. I stood slowly and walked to the bathroom, still clutching the tablet. I needed to see myself. I needed to remember who I was, who I used to be. The overhead light flickered on. I stared at the mirror. What I saw wasn't just age. It wasn't just grief. It was recognition. Lines that echoed my mother's mouth when she frowned. Eyes that mirrored Laurel's when she tried not to cry. Generations of women taught to endure, to adapt, to survive. I raised the tablet and held it up beside my face. Laurel's final frame reflected beside my own. That's when I saw it. The corner of the mirror was cracked. A jagged split right across my reflection's cheek. A clean break, a fracture, a warning. Visual storytelling, unintentional but undeniable. This house had become a hall of mirrors, watching, distorting, trapping. I wasn't just walking through Laurel's prison. I had been living in a variation of it my entire life. And now, I had a chance. Not to save her like a hero in a story, not to swoop in and fix everything, but to tell the truth, to make noise, to refuse silence. I walked back to the office, gathered every USB into a small leather pouch, and pocketed it. Then I knelt before the hallway panel, heart racing. Behind it, I'd find the rest of the story. But I already knew enough to understand the stakes. Laurel wasn't complicit. She was a survivor, waiting for someone to stop whispering and start listening. And I intended to do both. As I prepared to leave the room, the tablet screen lit up with a new notification. Motion detected. Office cam. 11:38 p.m. I froze. I wasn't moving anymore. The notification was live, which meant the camera had just detected someone else. I woke to a sound I didn't recognize. It wasn't loud, just wrong, subtle, artificial, like a reset. The house alarm. The sharp chirp of it, rearming itself, echoed down the hallway, crisp and hollow. I reached for my phone, checked the time. 6:03 a.m. I hadn't activated anything. When I limped into the foyer, the control panel blinked red. My access code, the one Grayson had programmed for me, had been deactivated. I tried again. Another rejection. Then the screen displayed a new message in sterile white text. System integrity restored. Guest profile expired. The phrase settled over me like a weight. I stepped back, heart knocking against my ribs. The morning light was just starting to pour through the blinds. It cast long, cold shadows across the hardwood. Then the speakers crackled. At first it was just static. Then his voice, Grayson's, cut through, pre-recorded, and sickeningly smooth. Good morning. For your continued comfort and security, please remain within the approved areas of the home. Do not attempt unauthorized access. Cooperation ensures safety. As always, we appreciate your understanding. I felt the floor sway under me. His voice, now omnipresent, detached from the man himself, coated the air like humidity. There was no anger in the recording. That made it worse. It wasn't a warning. It was an expectation. I moved back into the guest room and shut the door. I leaned against it, breath ragged, pressing my palms to the wood as though I could push the voice out. Cooperation ensures safety. That line echoed like a curse. It wasn't just surveillance anymore. It was containment. I was no longer a visitor. I was a variable, being handled. I sank onto the edge of the bed, heart still hammering. Every corner of the house felt like it was breathing, watching. I needed a place that hadn't been rewritten by him. Laurel's room. I stood and hobbled down the hallway. The door to her bedroom was closed, the frame pristine, unassuming. But the knob wouldn't turn. Of course not. I didn't hesitate. I limped to the kitchen, grabbed a paring knife, returned to the door. The lock was simple, manual. I jimmied it with quiet force until it gave way with a soft click. The door creaked open. Her room smelled like lavender and old perfume. A life preserved but unlived. The bed was made neatly, too neatly. A vanity stood by the far wall, mirror smudged slightly with fingerprints. One drawer was open just a crack. I stepped inside, slow, careful, as if the walls themselves might report me. At the foot of the bed sat a cedar hope chest. It looked untouched, reverent. My breath caught. I opened it. Inside, atop folded sweaters and faded greeting cards, was a worn, leather-bound notebook. The kind I used to give her every birthday, encouraging her to write, to dream. Her handwriting looped across the cover in black ink, unsent. I opened it, and the first page stopped me cold. Dear Mom, why didn't you come for me? I turned the page and the next entry hit harder. You always said you'd protect me, but you didn't. You protected him, then another. I waited for years to ask you this. Why was his comfort more important than my fear? The entries weren't all dated. Some were fragments, some were full pages, tear-stained, smeared, and unfinished. Some were just lines, fury rendered down to raw bone. I told you what he did. I told you how he made me feel small. And you stayed. You taught me how to disappear in plain sight. Each sentence cut through me like a blade. And then, one softer, I miss you. I hate that I miss you. but sometimes I think missing you is the only real thing I feel anymore. Tears blurred the page. My hands shook as I turned more of them. He doesn't yell like Dad did. That almost makes it worse. He just rewrites things until I can't remember what's real. Sometimes I think you'd understand. But then I remember. You trained me to doubt myself. Flashback. It hit me without warning. The living room couch. Laurel's hair still in pigtails. Me standing near the door with my overnight bag packed. My husband had thrown something again. Not at me, just near me. But Laurel had seen. I told her I was going to Grandma's. That it was just a few days. That everything was fine. She begged me to take her with me. I told her she'd be fine. That he wasn't angry with her. That moment had never left me. I'd buried it beneath years of rationalization and self-pity. I told myself I was doing what I could, that I didn't have the resources, that I had to pick my battles. But the truth was simpler. I was afraid, and I passed that fear down like an inheritance. That night, I left Laurel alone in a house with a man who broke things to make points. And now, all these years later, here she was, writing letters to a ghost of a mother she once believed in, hoping, somewhere in that silence, that I might hear her. And I hadn't. Not until now. I closed the notebook with trembling hands. The house seemed to breathe around me, tighter and more aware. I tucked the notebook under my arm and stood. Every step out of her room felt like a prayer. Back in the guest room, I sat on the edge of the bed, opened the journal again, and read the entries one by one. I wasn't sure if I was mourning the mother I thought I'd been, or discovering the woman I had refused to become. Maybe both. This house, with its cameras and coded phrases, wasn't just watching me. It was forcing me to look at myself. Laurel's voice, buried in those pages, was finally louder than Grayson's recorded calm. She had tried to reach me. In anger, in heartbreak, in silence. And I had never heard her. But now I was listening. And I wasn't leaving without her. The hallway panel groaned slightly as I unscrewed it, the cool metal cover clattering softly to the floor. Behind it, nestled among a tangle of wires and neatly labeled circuit switches, was a concealed drive slot, one I never would have noticed unless I'd known exactly where to look. Laurel's whisper in that secret recording echoed in my mind. Behind the breaker box. I slid the USB adapter in slowly. A soft green light flickered to life. I was in. The files were nested deep, beneath layers of folders named innocuously, logs, schedules, firmware backups. But further in, a folder simply labeled Archive opened into another set of folders marked with names. I hesitated. Each folder bore a woman's name, first names only. Some I didn't recognize. Tessa, Monique, Harper. But one stopped me cold. Joelle, Grayson's estranged sister. I remembered her vaguely from the wedding, mentioned once and never again. I clicked into Joelle's folder, scanned documents, chat transcripts, annotated journal entries. Her journal entries, it seemed, lifted and archived from who knows where. Each file was carefully named, each note highlighted. At the top of one entry in bold text, Grayson had added, displays repeated patterns of defiance, emotional independence above acceptable range. I stared at it, bile rising in my throat. In another file labeled Harper, a series of calendar screenshots showed social media check-ins, restaurants, museums. Grayson had time-stamped her outings, added notations, boundary erosion, identity shift noted, behavioral reorientation failed. The language wasn't just clinical. It was predatory. This wasn't surveillance. This was behavioral mapping, psychological profiling meant to dissect and reconstruct. I opened the last folder, Laurel. Dozens of files, more than any of the others. Her name wasn't just there, it dominated the archive. I clicked into a spreadsheet labeled behavioral_compliance_tracking. The columns chilled me. Tone metrics, eye contact frequency, deviation from routine, unscheduled silence, independent decisions. Each row was a report, a judgment. I scrolled faster. One column near the bottom stood out. Protocol deviation, 9.12. Laurel spent 2 nights off script. Intervention delayed. Another. Pregnancy suspected. Escalation may be required. I stopped breathing. I opened a file titled Incident Summary. Laurel, Bedroom 02A. A still image appeared on the screen. Laurel sitting on the floor, holding her stomach. Her eyes closed. Her face, peaceful almost. A rare image of her outside of tension. Then the camera zoomed. A hand moved protectively across her abdomen. My hand gripped the mouse tighter. Behind the still image were notes. Subject has not disclosed condition. Possible hormonal instability. Must monitor emotional shifts. May require reset plan. Reset plan. I swallowed the bile again. The quiet hum of the house suddenly felt deafening. My daughter wasn't just being watched, she was being cataloged. I turned to the printer beside the desk and hit print all. Pages began sliding out one by one. Faces, reports, screenshots, medical notes, personal photos annotated with cold detachment. The room filled with the low hum of spinning rollers and blinking lights. My heart pounded with every sheet that dropped into the tray. I grabbed Laurel's folder and began photographing every page with my phone. Close-ups, date stamps, highlights. Each flash of the screen was another entry into a growing case against him. I was no longer documenting for safety. I was documenting for justice. Then I noticed the drawer beneath the printer. It wasn't locked. Inside was a single sealed envelope, addressed in Laurel's handwriting. To Grayson, for your eyes only. I stared at it. Her loops were small, tight, the kind she used when she was scared. I opened it carefully, afraid of tearing the paper. Inside was a pregnancy test, positive, and a handwritten note. I won't let you raise them like this. My knees buckled. I sat hard on the chair, the envelope still open in my lap. The test glared up at me like a verdict. She had been planning to tell him. No, she had told him, but it never reached him. Or maybe it had, and this was his response, ramping up the surveillance, resetting the systems, accelerating compliance. I stared at the note again. I won't let you raise them like this. This wasn't just about survival anymore. This was about protection, legacy, choice. Laurel had grown up in the shadow of a silent home. She'd watched me choose the easy quiet over the dangerous truth again and again. And now she was trying to carve a different path, not just for herself, but for the life growing inside her. And she did it alone. No wonder she didn't answer my calls. No wonder she looked through me with that haunted stillness. She wasn't just living under surveillance. She was strategizing under siege. And I had been a variable in Grayson's equation. But now I was something else. I packed the printed files into a manila folder I found near the desk. I snapped a few last photos, one of Laurel's folder full of notations and timestamps, and another of the pregnancy test still sitting in the envelope, like a lighthouse in the wreckage. Before I left the room, I turned once more to the screen. Faces filled the monitor. Women I didn't know, some smiling, some blurred by motion, all frozen mid-moment, all categorized and critiqued and discarded. I clicked the monitor off. Let them rest. Let him be the one under review now. I walked back into the hall, folder under one arm, envelope sealed again in my coat pocket. The hallway light flickered as I passed beneath it. No more fear. No more silence. Laurel had drawn the line with ink and defiance. And now, it was my turn to step across it. As I reached the guest room, my phone buzzed with a single text. Unknown number. You shouldn't have opened that drawer. I didn't sleep that night. I sat at the small desk in the guest room, the manila folder of printed files beside me, the sealed envelope heavy in my coat pocket. The silence of the house felt different now. Not oppressive, not watchful. It felt like waiting, like the quiet just before a storm decides whether to pass over or descend. I stared at the tablet screen, the cursor blinking in an empty video recording window. I had opened the camera app hours ago, but I hadn't spoken a word, because I didn't know how to begin. I thought of Laurel, of her handwritten note, of her hollow voice on the phone, of her letters filled with fury and longing. I thought of every time she reached for me and I pulled away because I didn't know how to love without rules, without conditions. I had spent so long convincing myself that I was the wounded one, but I wasn't just a victim. I was a mirror, a silent accomplice to a cycle I should have shattered years ago. There had been signs. Laurel was 13 when she first asked to cut her hair short. She said it made her feel free. Her father rolled his eyes and said, "You'll regret it. Boys don't like that." And me? I said nothing, just smiled nervously and changed the subject. She wanted to go to a different college than the one we'd pushed her toward. Said she wanted to study anthropology, work in the field, travel. I told her to be practical. I praised her when she switched to finance. When she stood up to a teacher for misgrading her test, I told her she should have been more diplomatic. When she cried after her first breakup, I said, "Don't let anyone see you like this. You're stronger than that." Obedience over voice, peace over truth, order over chaos. I called it love. But really, it was fear. My fear handed to her like an heirloom. And now I saw what it cost her, what it cost both of us. I pushed back from the desk and stood slowly, knees aching, heart pounding harder than it had all day. I walked to the mirror across the room. It was small, square, mounted above the dresser. My reflection stared back, eyes red-rimmed, shoulders slightly hunched, the exhaustion of years pressed into my skin like age. "Say it," I whispered. My lips didn't move. I tried again, louder. "Say it." Still nothing. I reached out and touched the glass, pressing 2 fingers to the center, right between my eyes. "I'm sorry," I whispered. "I didn't protect you. I didn't see you." My voice cracked. I tried again. "Laurel, I failed you." The reflection didn't soften. It waited. "I failed you when I told you silence was strength. I failed you when I made you think love was something you had to earn." My knees buckled, and I dropped to the chair again, burying my face in my hands. I remembered watching Laurel as a child, bright, defiant, stubborn in the most beautiful ways. I remembered how I slowly chipped at those edges, convinced I was shaping her into someone safer, someone the world wouldn't hurt. But I'd only taught her to expect control, to accept observation, to mistake fear for stability. I took a shaky breath and opened the camera app again. I pressed record, and this time I spoke. "My name is Eleanor Pierce. I am a mother, a survivor, and I am complicit." I paused. Everything I'm about to say is true, and I'm saying it because it has to stop. I turned the camera slightly to the side, showing the folder of documents, the envelope, the printed screenshots. I continued. "My daughter, Laurel, is in danger. Not in a way that leaves bruises. In a way that erodes identity, that dismantles confidence, that rewrites reality." I looked into the camera. Her fiancé, Grayson Holt, has created a system of surveillance and control that he disguises as care. He has tracked her, monitored her, isolated her, and now he's trying to do the same to me. I lifted the sealed envelope into frame. She's pregnant. He doesn't know, or maybe he does. But what matters is this: she left this note. She said she wouldn't let him raise them like this. And I believe her, because she's stronger than I ever allowed her to be. I paused. Tears slipped quietly down my cheeks. "I'm recording this in case I can't make it out of here, in case something happens. But more than that, I'm recording this because the truth deserves a voice." I swallowed. "And Laurel, if you ever see this, I'm sorry. I'm sorry for the times I told you to be small, to be quiet, to be good." I smiled through the tears. "You don't have to be good anymore. You just have to be you. And that is enough. Always has been." I ended the recording. Then I opened another app and uploaded it to 3 cloud drives. Sent copies to my lawyer, an old friend I trusted, and a burner email I'd created earlier. I stood again, walked back to the mirror, stared at myself, practiced. "Laurel," I said softly, "I was wrong. Again. Laurel, I should have believed you. Another. Laurel, I'm with you now. Whatever you decide, whatever happens next, I'm with you." I kept saying it, again and again. Not because I thought she'd hear me through the walls, but because I needed to remember how to speak truth into silence. How to fill the void I'd spent a lifetime pretending didn't exist. When I finally looked away from the mirror, I didn't feel whole, but I felt real, and that was more than enough to fight for. The knock on the front door wasn't loud, but it cleaved the silence in two. It was early evening. I had just finished preparing tea, my hands still trembling slightly from earlier. I wasn't expecting anyone, not for 2 more days. The knock came again, this time followed by the sound of a key in the lock. The door swung open. Laurel stepped in first, her expression unreadable, followed by Grayson, his tailored coat still pristine, suitcase in hand. His smile, too wide, hit me like a slap. "We thought we'd surprise you," he said, setting down the suitcase with theatrical care. My throat tightened. Laurel offered a weak smile. "Things wrapped early." I didn't respond right away. I focused on steadying my breath, smoothing my features, calm, neutral, play the role. I couldn't let him see what I knew. "Oh," I finally said. "Well, welcome back." Grayson clapped his hands. You've kept the place in perfect shape, I see. Thank you for that. He moved toward the living room, glancing at the hallway security panel. Laurel didn't follow. She lingered near the door, her eyes briefly meeting mine. Something flickered there. Not guilt, not fear, recognition. She knew I knew. Dinner was quiet. We sat at the polished table, the three of us, bowls of lentil soup steaming between us. Laurel picked at hers. Grayson ate with precise movements, his fork glinting under the soft light. I forced each bite down like it was a negotiation. The conversation was hollow. Work updates, weather, flights. He asked about my knee with mechanical concern. I gave vague answers. The tension swelled in the unsaid. Every word was a smokescreen. Finally, I asked it. So, about the cameras? Grayson looked up from his plate, smiled, tilted his head slightly. Cameras? I kept my face blank. The ones in the hallway and the guest room, they're interesting. He chuckled, leaned back. Oh, those. Part of the home security suite. You'd be surprised how often we get porch pirates around here. Never hurts to have eyes. His gaze didn't waver. I nodded slowly. They move. Motion sensors, he said. Standard stuff. Laurel didn't speak. Her hands trembled slightly as she refilled her water glass. I leaned back in my chair, arms crossed casually. Do they record? Grayson grinned. Only if you ask them nicely. He laughed. I smiled too. Hollow, measured. The game was on, and I was done pretending I didn't know the rules. That night, the house moved like a stage around me. Lights dimmed on schedule. Footsteps creaked in the hallway. Laurel's door closed with a whisper. I waited an hour, maybe two. Then I stepped into the hallway, padded quietly to her room, and knocked once. Software. The door opened halfway. She stood in a sweatshirt and leggings, barefoot, eyes heavy. I slipped the envelope into her hand. I saw everything, I whispered. Her eyes didn't widen. She didn't flinch. She simply nodded. And then, so quietly I barely heard it, she whispered, I know. She closed the door again. Back in the guest room, I sat on the edge of the bed, adrenaline still humming through my bones. I didn't dare sleep. I waited, eyes on the crack beneath the door, watching for shadows, for motion. Hours passed. Then, at exactly 3:03 a.m., my door creaked open. Laurel. She was dressed, coat zipped, duffel over one shoulder. Her face was pale but firm. We're leaving, she said, voice low. Now. I stared at her. Laurel. I have a car around the corner, she said. We need to go. He's asleep, or he thinks I am. Her eyes met mine fully now. No more shields. I know what he's done. I've known for a while, but I didn't have a plan. Not until you got here. She reached out her hand. For the first time in years, I took it. No hesitation. No questions. We didn't look back. As we slipped through the side door, the porch light flickered once, then blinked out completely, a soft click behind us. The front door had just relocked itself, system reset. He knew. And now, we were already running. We didn't speak as we stepped out the back door. The air was thick with silence, the kind that carried weight. Not from fear exactly, though it hummed beneath every movement, but from something harder to define. The quiet between two people who had learned not to rely on anyone, now forced to lean on each other. Laurel led the way. Her duffel was slung tight against her side, and she walked fast, avoiding the path, skirting through the shrubs that lined the backyard. I followed, heart hammering, Kane left behind. My knee screamed with every step, but adrenaline pushed me forward. She stopped by the gate, knelt, and pulled out a wrapped bundle from beneath a loose board. Inside was a black hoodie, car keys, and a prepaid phone. She handed me the hoodie without a word. I slipped it on. It smelled faintly of detergent and lavender. This way, she said, voice barely above a whisper. We cut across two backyards, moved along a side street, and then finally reached a dark gray sedan parked under a tree. Laurel opened the passenger door for me, helped me in, then dropped the duffel in the back and slid into the driver's seat. She started the engine without headlights. As we rolled away from the curb, I allowed myself one glance back. The house looked still, too still. We drove for 10 minutes in silence. Laurel's hands gripped the wheel tightly, knuckles white. Her jaw was set, focused. Her eyes flicked constantly to the rearview mirror. Finally, she spoke. I've been preparing to leave for 3 weeks. I looked over at her. She didn't meet my eyes. I just didn't know how. Why now? I asked. Her jaw clenched tighter. He got worse after I found out I was pregnant. Started changing passwords, locking more things, watching me more than usual. He'd always been invasive, but it shifted, became possessive. Her voice cracked on the last word. I started stashing money, she continued, opening backup accounts, using the guest Wi-Fi to plan. But I didn't have a window. I didn't know where to go. I wasn't sure I could even trust myself to leave. My throat tightened. I stared ahead at the dark road. And then you came. Her voice softened, but it was sharp, edged with pain. I thought maybe you being there would calm him down, distract him, or maybe just remind me what a real mirror looks like. I didn't know what to say to that, so I said the only true thing I could. I'm sorry. She didn't respond, but she didn't look away either. After an hour on the highway, she pulled into a gas station on the edge of a rural town. We parked beside a dumpster behind the store. We're switching, she said. From the trunk, she pulled another set of plates, swapped them in seconds. Then she retrieved a burner phone, broke it in half, and tossed it into the bin. I did the same with mine. When we returned to the car, she handed me a new device. Keep it off until I say. We merged back onto the road, heading west. The silence that followed wasn't cold. It was cautious, like testing the floorboards of a house you're rebuilding from scratch. I didn't know, I said after a long stretch. Not really. Not until I saw the footage. She nodded slowly. He was careful, charming, strategic. I looked over at her. So were you. That made her laugh, dry, tired. I learned from the best. We drove another 30 miles. The highway thinned out. Trees replaced strip malls. Laurel finally pulled into a rest stop and parked. We sat there a moment, the hum of the engine the only sound. She finally turned to me. I blamed you for a long time. I know. I still do, she added, not unkindly. I nodded. You should. I hated how you disappeared inside yourself when things got hard, how you taught me to stay quiet when I wanted to scream. I looked down at my hands. They looked older than I remembered. I did that to survive. I know, she said. But I thought surviving was all we were supposed to do, and now I'm carrying someone new. I don't want them to inherit that. A long pause settled between us. Then we won't let them, I said. She nodded, a tear sliding down her cheek. She didn't wipe it away. We rested there, the two of us, in the dim silence of the rest stop. A mother and daughter, fugitives of a legacy they were finally willing to dismantle. The cabin sat at the edge of the woods, just outside a forgotten stretch of county land. It belonged to Laurel's old college friend, a woman we didn't contact directly, just left cash, a note, and a favor she'd agreed to months ago, should this day ever come. The place was small, 2 bedrooms, a narrow kitchen, a fireplace that hissed and popped each time we added more wood. There was no internet, no cell reception. The only phone was a rotary landline that hung on the kitchen wall like a relic, and it was perfect. It didn't feel like safety, not at first. It felt like withdrawal, like detox. The silence wasn't the suffocating kind I'd known before. This one was different, spacious, loaded. The first day passed without many words. Laurel moved mechanically, unpacking clothes, stacking non-perishables, making lists by hand. I watched her from across the small living room, unsure of how to help, unwilling to push. That night, after we'd eaten canned soup and watched the fire dance in the stone hearth, she sat down beside me. The fire cast amber across her cheeks, softening the sharpness that had shaped her expression for years. And then, quietly, suddenly, she cried. Her face crumpled, her shoulders shook. No sound at first, just the slow unraveling of everything she'd held inside. I didn't move. I didn't speak. She cried into her own hands at first, then into mine. It was the first time I'd seen her like that since she was 12. When the sobs began to ease, she whispered, "You were the first person to teach me silence meant safety." The words gutted me. She didn't say them with blame, just clarity. A truth named out loud. I closed my eyes. And you were the first person to teach me what it looked like to survive out loud. We sat that way a long time, letting the fire do the talking. The next day, we made a plan. We gathered everything. Documents, screenshots, backups of the journal files, copies of my video confession. Laurel used the landline to place a single call to a legal aid service for victims of psychological abuse. They promised to dispatch a contact to a secure location once the weather cleared. That afternoon, she began writing her statement. I began mine too. We worked at opposite ends of the room, firelight between us, the clicking of pens, our only soundtrack. Occasionally, we'd look up and meet eyes, no words, but something passed there, a softening. At night, I told her stories I hadn't told anyone, about my mother's cutting silence, my father's absent disapproval, how I once fell in love with someone who treated me like I was made of glass and fire, until I began dimming myself to keep the peace. I confessed that by the time I married her father, I had already forgotten what love felt like when it was safe. She didn't interrupt, just listened. Then, one night, she said, I used to think you loved him more than you loved me. I inhaled sharply. I loved quiet more than I loved confrontation, I said. And I let that be louder than you. It wasn't an apology, it was something harder, a confession with roots. The next morning, a package arrived. No sound, no knock, just a plain brown box at the doorstep, sealed with clean tape, no return address. Laurel brought it inside, both of us frozen in place. The fire still crackled, but the warmth it gave off didn't reach us now. She set the box on the kitchen table. We stared at it for a long time. Finally, I opened it. Inside was a flash drive. No note, no markings. Just a single USB stick in a padded sleeve. I looked at Laurel. She didn't blink. We plug it in. I set up the small emergency laptop. Laurel sat beside me. I inserted the drive. A single file, no name, no date. We opened it. Footage loaded. The camera was angled high, just slightly off-center. It showed the cabin, the inside of the cabin. Footage of us. Laurel curled on the couch, asleep, me placing wood in the fire, a long silence, a conversation too far away to hear. Then another clip. Laurel on the porch, me inside on the phone, another, me reading, Laurel brushing her hair. The images weren't threatening on their own, but the message was clear. He knew where we were. We stared at the screen until it went black. Laurel stood up. We move again. I nodded, but inside something deeper stirred. This time, we wouldn't just run. We'd fight, together. As I ejected the flash drive, I noticed something strange on the back. A sticker, small, black, barely visible. But I knew that symbol. It was the same one Grayson used on his journals. This wasn't a warning, it was a signature. We didn't speak for almost an hour after watching the flash drive. Laurel sat at the table, fists clenched so tightly her knuckles paled. I paced, slowly at first, then faster, every creak of the floorboard syncing with my heartbeat. He knew. He was still watching. And now he wanted us to know it. This wasn't surveillance, it was a declaration. Not, I'm coming for you, but worse, you never left. I thought we cut everything, Laurel whispered. Every line, every trace we did, I said. But he planted something before we even knew to look. She stood. We can't just keep running. No, I said, we won't. And that's when everything shifted. Laurel didn't break down. She picked up the phone and dialed. A lawyer answered, one she'd researched before we ever left the house. It was a name she'd memorized months ago, but hadn't had the courage to call. Until now. This is Laurel Pierce, she said clearly. I need to file a restraining order. And I have evidence of unlawful surveillance, psychological manipulation, and coercive control. Her voice didn't waver. We gathered every piece of evidence we had. The flash drive, my video confession, the printed screenshots, the backup files Grayson hadn't wiped, even Laurel's old letters, ones we never sent, now part of a larger truth finally given space. We drove into town together, met the lawyer at a quiet cafe posing as a bookstore. The woman was sharp, empathetic, and fast. She asked for nothing more than facts, and Laurel gave them to her with startling clarity. Next came the police. We didn't go to the local department. Too risky, too easy for influence. We submitted the report through the district cybercrimes unit in the city, far enough removed from Grayson's reach. We uploaded the evidence through encrypted drives, shared affidavits, signed under oath. It didn't feel like victory. It felt like exposure. But it was necessary. Later that night, I stood by the window in the cabin, watching the trees shift in the wind. My hands trembled, Not from fear, but from the adrenaline of finally doing something that couldn't be undone. My phone buzzed. It was him, a video call request, no text, no warning. Laurel was asleep. I didn't wake her. I walked into the kitchen and accepted. Grayson's face filled the screen, calm, well-lit, polished, as always. "Eleanor," he said, like we were picking up a dinner conversation. "You've been busy." I said nothing. He tilted his head. "You always did have a flair for dramatics." I kept my voice level. "I see your game now, and I'm not playing anymore." "Game?" He smiled. "That's such a limited way of framing things." "You crossed a line," I said. "You watched her. You recorded her. You designed control and called it care." His smile tightened. "She needed guidance. Number you needed obedience." He exhaled, eyes narrowing slightly. "And what do you need, Eleanor? A legacy? Redemption? Attention? You're not the victim you think you are?" I leaned in, camera steady. "I know I wasn't always the mother Laurel needed, but I never watched her cry through a lens and called it love." He paused. A flicker of something passed across his face. "Where are you?" he asked. I didn't flinch. "Where you can't reach." "You think the police will help you?" he said. "They don't understand this kind of situation. You'll look hysterical, disjointed, emotional." "Let them," I said, because I gave them everything. I held up a second flash drive, the backup of the backup, and let him see the sticker, his symbol. "This is with law enforcement now," I said. "Your archive, your journal, your system." He blinked. I leaned closer. "You won't control her. Or me. Not anymore." His expression didn't change, but his silence did. It thickened. "You've made a mistake," he said finally. "No," I said. "I've corrected one." I ended the call, set the phone down, and for the first time in years I didn't feel watched. I felt seen. It took weeks. Weeks of hearings, of re-explaining things that never should have needed explanation. Laurel and I sat in a courtroom filled with whispers, procedural delays, and skeptical eyes. But we told the truth, again and again. Grayson was calm, polished, smug in the beginning. But with every digital footprint, every archived log, every time-stamped file, his control crumbled. The judge saw it. The prosecutor saw it. And most importantly, Laurel saw it. Her voice, when she testified, didn't shake. She called his behavior by its name: coercive, calculated, dangerous. I sat behind her as she spoke, hands clenched, tears quietly soaking into my collar. Not because I was afraid, but because I had never been more proud. When it was my turn to testify, I didn't tell the court what a monster Grayson was. I told them how easy it is to disappear without ever leaving, how subtle abuse can be, how insidious, how silence can stretch across generations like a thread no one knows how to cut, until someone finally does. The restraining order was granted without appeal. Criminal charges moved forward. The court recognized the pattern. The system wasn't perfect, but for once, it was on our side. After the last gavel fell, we stood outside together in the cold wind, our coats bundled close, paperwork heavy in our hands. Laurel looked at me and said, "You didn't have to stay." "I did," I replied. "This time I did." She hugged me. It wasn't tentative or cold. It was whole. She stayed in the city after the hearings, close to her new therapist, closer to the support she'd built quietly in the months before everything unraveled. She didn't move into a new apartment right away. She stayed in a shelter program for survivors with legal support, group counseling, prenatal care. It was a place that didn't feel like starting over. It felt like starting forward. As for me, I went home, but not to the same version of it. I cleared out half my closets, donated things I'd kept out of obligation, not joy. I removed every object that reminded me of who I had pretended to be. And then I did something new. I bought a camera, not a hidden one, not for watching anyone else. A simple DSLR, secondhand, reliable. I mounted it on a stand in my living room, and every week I sat down in front of it. At first I just spoke, stream of consciousness, unfiltered. But slowly it became something else, something structured, intentional, a video journal, a reckoning, a message, and eventually, a resource. People started watching, other women, other mothers. Some were older than me, some younger. Some left comments that said, "I thought I was the only one." I started getting letters in the mail, small tokens, notes tucked between folded paper. "You said it the way I never could. You helped me find my daughter again. It wasn't therapy, it wasn't justice, it was truth. And that, for the first time, felt like enough. Laurel and I text daily, sometimes short check-ins, sometimes long, late-night exchanges that feel like the conversations we should have had years ago. She's learning how to ask for help. I'm learning how to offer it without condition. Some nights, I still watch the footage, my own recordings now, of myself, rewinding through my voice, my stumbles, my truths. One afternoon, I recorded a message meant for the women who wrote to me. But mostly, it was for the version of myself that might still be out there, trapped in someone else's house, someone else's silence. I looked straight into the lens and said, "You are not broken, and even if you are, so what? You can still rebuild. Cracks aren't flaws, they're maps. They show where you've been. They show where the light gets in." I smiled then, really smiled. Not because everything was perfect, but because I wasn't afraid of the imperfection anymore. The last scene didn't come with warning. I was folding laundry on a quiet Tuesday morning, the kind with soft light and coffee that doesn't get cold too fast. My phone buzzed. It was a message from Laurel. No text, just a photo. A black and white ultrasound. Blurry and beautiful. Below it, one sentence. "This one will grow up free." I sat down, holding the phone like it was something sacred. I thought of the first time I held Laurel in a hospital room. How tiny she was, how terrified I'd been, how I'd promised myself I'd never let her feel the things I'd felt growing up, and how I'd failed. But now, she was building something new, and I believed her. This child would grow up knowing love that didn't monitor or measure, a mother who listened, a family that healed by choice, not blood. The cycle had cracked, and through that fracture, something better had bloomed. Think your home is safe? Think again. If you've ever stayed quiet to keep the peace, this story was written for you. Join the ones breaking the cycle, not just surviving, but rewriting what family means. Because the most dangerous secrets don't live outside. They live right at home. Subscribe to stay with us. What comes next will shatter the silence.